Hey guys, everyone knows Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal as the ultimate symbol of eternal love for his wife Mumtaz Mahal. But what if I told you that his obsessive grief actually bankrupted one of history's richest empires, sparked violent rebellions across India, caused his own son to imprison him in a tower, and killed thousands of workers in brutal construction conditions? Tonight we're uncovering how the world's most beautiful monument to love was built on a foundation of empire-shattering devastation. Welcome to Hearts and History, where you fall asleep to fascinating stories and wake up knowing more about love across time and cultures. Get comfortable, dim those lights, and let these tales of romance, obsession, and human complexity carry you towards sleep. If you enjoy drifting off to historical love stories, hit subscribe and that notification bell. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love knowing our global community of history lovers spans every time zone. Chapter 1. The Untold Love Story in Ruins. Picture Mughal India in 1607, the world's richest empire, controlling vast territories across the subcontinent. The court glittered with Persian silk, precious gems, and refined poetry. This was a world where royal marriages were political tools, where princes maintained harems, where genuine love between spouses was rare enough to be remarkable. Into this sophisticated but calculating world stepped 14-year-old Prince Khurram, who would become Shah Jahan, and everything would change because of a single glance. At the Meena Bazaar, a private market where royal women could shop unveiled, young Prince Khurram saw 15-year-old Arjumand Banu Begum. Court chroniclers recorded something extraordinary. He became instantly completely infatuated, so much so that he immediately asked his father for permission to marry her. In a world of arranged political alliances, this kind of romantic obsession was unusual enough that multiple historians noted it. They were betrothed immediately, but following custom, didn't marry until 5 years later in 1612. For 19 years, the woman who became Mumtaz Mahal was Shah Jahan's inseparable companion. She travelled with him on military campaigns, highly unusual for a royal wife, living in military camps while pregnant, acting as his political advisor. Court records show she held the imperial seal, meaning she co-signed official documents, giving her actual political power. She gave birth to 14 children. Only 7 survived infancy. The physical toll of constant pregnancy and campaign travel was enormous, but she stayed by his side through everything. June 1631, Mumtaz was accompanying Shah Jahan on a military campaign in Burhanpur when she went into labour with their 14th child. After 30 brutal hours, she delivered a daughter. Moments later, she began hemorrhaging. The court chroniclers recorded that she knew she was dying. With her final breaths, she extracted 2 promises from her grief-stricken husband: never marry again, which he would ignore, and build her a memorial so beautiful the world would never forget their love. She died June 17, 1631. She was 38 years old. Shah Jahan's grief was immediate and complete. He locked himself in his chambers for 8 days, refusing all food, all visitors, all responsibilities of empire. When he finally emerged, courtiers were shocked by his transformation. His hair had turned completely white, his back was bent like an old man's. He looked decades older than his 41 years. He declared 2 years of official court mourning, banned music and celebrations throughout the entire empire, and began planning something that would consume everything he had built. But here's where love became something darker. Shah Jahan didn't just want to build a mausoleum. He became obsessed with creating something so magnificent, so perfect, so eternal, that it would drain the empire's treasury and break its people. Construction of the Taj Mahal began in 1632. It would take 22 years to complete. Over 20,000 workers and artisans were conscripted. Many were forced labourers. The working conditions were brutal. Men died in accidents, from heat exhaustion, from falls from scaffolding high above the marble dome. The white marble was quarried from Makrana in Rajasthan, requiring massive transportation over hundreds of miles using elephants, oxen, and human labour. Semi-precious stones were imported from across Asia: jade from China, turquoise from Tibet, sapphires from Sri Lanka, carnelian from Arabia. The cost was staggering. Estimates suggest 32 million rupees, equivalent to about $1 billion today, but representing a far larger percentage of the Mughal Empire's entire gross domestic product. The treasury was being drained, and people were beginning to notice. As the years dragged on and the costs mounted, taxes increased across the empire. Regions began to rebel against the financial burden of one man's grief. Meanwhile, Shah Jahan wasn't finished. He planned an identical black marble mausoleum for himself, across the Yamuna River, connected to Mumtaz's tomb by a bridge. His son Aurangzeb watched the empire's finances collapse, watched rebellions spread, watched his father's obsession with death consume everything their ancestors had built. And Aurangzeb began to plan something of his own, something that would shake the very foundations of Mughal power. In 1658, 27 years after Mumtaz's death, Prince Aurangzeb had seen enough. He led a coup against his own father, defeated his brothers in a brutal war of succession, and imprisoned Shah Jahan in Agra Fort. The once mighty emperor who had commanded vast armies and endless wealth spent his final 8 years as a prisoner. His cell had one mercy, a window facing the Taj Mahal. He could see his wife's tomb across the river, but he would never visit it again, never touch the marble, never pray at her grave. Shah Jahan died in 1666, still imprisoned by his son, still gazing at the monument that had cost him everything. He was buried beside Mumtaz, in the Taj Mahal, the only element that breaks the building's perfect symmetry, because it was designed for her alone. His tomb is slightly off-center, an eternal reminder that even in death, his presence disrupted the perfection he had sacrificed everything to create. The most beautiful monument to love in the world had become a tomb for the empire that built it. The Taj Mahal embodies a profound paradox. It's simultaneously a testament to genuine love and a monument to destructive obsession. Shah Jahan's devotion to Mumtaz was real. Court records from their 19 years together show a partnership unusual in royal marriages. But his response to losing her reveals how grief, when combined with absolute power and unlimited resources, can become something harmful to everyone around it. The thousands who died building it rarely appear in the romantic legend we tell ourselves about eternal love. This tension between beautiful intent and harmful impact makes the Taj Mahal more complex than simple romantic legend suggests. In Mughal culture, grand architectural gestures demonstrated power and piety, but none approached the scale or cost of Shah Jahan's monument. He elevated personal grief to the level of state policy, transforming private loss into public expense. The financial strain contributed to the Mughal Empire's eventual decline, making it vulnerable to later invasions. Love had become the empire's undoing, one beautiful, terrible stone at a time. Today, millions visit the Taj Mahal, believing it represents pure, uncomplicated love. But perhaps the real lesson isn't about eternal devotion. It's about how even the most powerful feelings must be balanced with responsibility to the living. The workers who died building it, the empire strained by its cost, the son who imprisoned his father, they're part of the story too. Even though we don't see their names carved in marble, sometimes the most loving thing is knowing when enough is enough. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider that the world's most famous monument to love is also a reminder that the grandest gestures aren't always the most loving ones. Shah Jahan's grief was real, his devotion genuine, but his response to loss caused enormous suffering to others. In our next chapter, we'll explore how this pattern of obsessive love has repeated throughout history, leaving beautiful ruins and broken lives in its wake. Rest well, and wake knowing that love, at its truest, considers the cost to everyone. In 1607, Mughal India commanded more wealth than any empire on earth. Silk roads converged in Delhi, spice routes fed endless treasuries. The court of Emperor Jahangir sparkled with Persian carpets, Chinese jade, and Arabian pearls. This was a world where princes learned poetry alongside warfare, where love was considered dangerous if it interfered with politics. Into this glittering, ruthless world stepped 14-year-old Prince Khurram, future Shah Jahan. He had no idea he was about to meet the woman who would reshape an empire. The Meena Bazaar was the one place in the Mughal court where royal women could walk unveiled. Once a year, they transformed the palace courtyard into a private marketplace, selling silk scarves, jewelry, perfumes to the men of their family. It was theatre, really, carefully choreographed glimpses of faces usually hidden behind marble screens. Prince Khurram wandered between stalls, bored by tradition, until he saw Arjuman Banu Begum arranging glass bangles at her booth. 15 years old, daughter of a Persian noble, something about her concentration, the way she held each piece up to the light. Court chronicles record what happened next in unusual detail. The prince stood frozen, watching her work. When she finally looked up and met his eyes, he later wrote it felt like recognition, as if he'd been searching for her without knowing it. He asked to buy every piece of jewelry at her stall, not to impress her, but because he couldn't think of anything else to say. She laughed. That's what the chroniclers remembered most, how she laughed at this serious prince buying bangles he'd never wear. 3 days later, he begged his father for permission to marry her. 5 years passed between betrothal and marriage. That was custom, time for the bride to mature, for families to negotiate, for politics to align. But Khurram wrote to Arjumand constantly. Letters that survived show not just passion, but genuine friendship. He asked her opinions on military strategy, on poetry, on court disputes. She wrote back with advice that proved remarkably astute. When they finally married in 1612, she became Mumtaz Mahal, chosen one of the palace. For once, a royal nickname that actually fit, she was his chosen one, in every sense that mattered. 19 years. That's how long their partnership lasted. She travelled with him on every military campaign, living in silk pavilions that could be assembled in hours, dismantled by dawn. She gave birth to 14 children, 7 survived infancy. The constant pregnancy, the campaign travel, the physical demands. Court physicians worried about her health, but she refused to stay safely in the harem while he fought battles. She wanted to be beside him, sharing the danger and the decisions. The other wives resented her influence. Everyone at court knew Shah Jahan consulted Mumtaz before making any major choice. She held the imperial seal. Think about that for a moment. In an empire where women were supposed to remain invisible, Mumtaz Mahal co-signed official documents. Her signature appeared on treaties, on appointments, on policies that affected millions. Shah Jahan had given her actual power, not just ceremonial titles. When nobles petitioned the throne, they knew to court her favor as much as his. She established schools for girls, funded hospitals, supported widows, using her influence to quietly revolutionize how the empire treated its most vulnerable citizens. This wasn't just love, this was partnership at the highest levels of government. June 1631, the Deccan campaign against rebel kingdoms had dragged on for months. Mumtaz was 8 months pregnant, but she insisted on accompanying Shah Jahan south to Burhanpur. The summer heat was brutal. The roads were dust and stones. Her attendants begged her to return to Agra, to deliver the child in comfort and safety. She refused. 19 years of marriage, and she'd never let him face a campaign alone. On June 17th, labour began. 30 hours later, she delivered a daughter, Gauharara Begum. For a brief moment, there was relief. Then the hemorrhaging started. Court physicians tried everything they knew. Compresses, herbal remedies, prayer, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. Mumtaz knew she was dying. You can see it in her final requests. 2 promises she extracted from Shah Jahan. Never marry again, though he would break this pledge within 2 years, taking another wife for political reasons, and build her a memorial so beautiful the world would never forget their love. That second promise, that's the one that would reshape history. As dawn broke over the military camp, Mumtaz Mahal closed her eyes for the last time. She was 38 years old. Shah Jahan disappeared for 8 days, locked himself in his tent, refusing food, refusing visitors, refusing to acknowledge that the empire still needed governing. When he finally emerged, his own guards barely recognized him. His black beard had turned completely white. His shoulders were hunched like an old man's. The courtiers whispered that he'd aged 20 years in 8 days. He declared 2 full years of official mourning throughout the empire. No music, no celebrations, no festivals. 20 million subjects were ordered to share his grief, whether they wanted to or not. This was when love began transforming into something darker. The planning consumed him. Not just a tomb that would have been understandable, even appropriate, but Shah Jahan envisioned something unprecedented. A monument so perfect it would make the living world seem shabby by comparison. He commissioned the empire's greatest architects, demanding they design a building that captured the essence of paradise itself. White marble that would shimmer like moonlight, gardens that would bloom eternally, reflecting pools that would mirror the sky. The estimated cost was staggering, 32 million rupees, but Shah Jahan had stopped caring about practical concerns. Grief had become his only policy. Construction began in 1632, 22 years it would take. Over 20,000 workers and artisans were conscripted from across the empire. Master craftsmen from Persia, Turkey, and India worked alongside forced labourers who had no choice in the matter. The white marble came from Makrana and Rajasthan, blocks so heavy they required teams of 20 oxen to transport. Semi-precious stones were imported from across Asia, jade from China, turquoise from Tibet, carnelian from Arabia. Each tiny flower inlaid in the marble walls required hours of meticulous work. Men died in quarry accidents. They died from heat exhaustion. They died falling from scaffolding. The human cost was enormous, but Shah Jahan seemed incapable of seeing it. He visited the construction site daily, demanding perfection in every detail. Workers who made mistakes were flogged. Some legends claim he ordered the hands of craftsmen cut off so they could never build anything else so beautiful, though historians dispute this. What's certain is that working conditions were brutal. 12-hour days in temperatures that reached 120 degrees, no safety equipment, inadequate food and water. The project consumed workers like fuel, burning through human lives to create something that would outlast them all. The most beautiful monument to love ever built was constructed on a foundation of suffering. The empire's finances crumbled. 32 million rupees represented roughly $1 billion today, but more importantly, it was a massive percentage of the Mughal treasury. Taxes increased dramatically to fund the project. Provinces began to rebel, not against Shah Jahan's authority, but against the crushing financial burden of his grief. Trade routes suffered as resources were diverted to marble transport and craftsmen's wages. The military weakened as funds meant for weapons and soldier pay went instead to Turkish jade and Persian carpets. Shah Jahan's son Aurangzeb watched his inheritance dissolving one marble block at a time. In 1658, Aurangzeb had seen enough. The empire was bankrupting itself to honor a dead woman while living citizens suffered. He led a coup against his father, defeated his brothers in a war of succession, and claimed the throne. Shah Jahan was imprisoned in Agra Fort, not executed, but confined to a tower with one window. That window faced the Taj Mahal. For the remaining 8 years of his life, he could see his wife's tomb across the Yamuna River, but never visit it. He spent his days watching the white marble change color with the light dawn pink, noon brilliant, sunset gold. Shah Jahan died in 1666, still gazing toward the tomb that had cost him his empire. Aurangzeb allowed his father's body to be placed beside Mumtaz, within the Taj Mahal, the only element that breaks the monument's perfect symmetry. It was designed for her alone. His sarcophagus disrupts the careful balance, an unplanned addition that somehow makes the whole structure more human. The man who bankrupted an empire for love lies forever beside the woman whose death drove him to madness. Even in death, they remained inseparable and controversial. The Taj Mahal stands today as history's most complex monument to love. Beautiful beyond question, but built on foundations of obsession, suffering, and financial ruin. Millions visit each year, seeing only the perfect proportions and luminous marble. They don't think about the thousands who died building it, the empire weakened by its cost, the son driven to rebellion by his father's dangerous grief. Perhaps that's the real lesson of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal, that even the most genuine love, when taken to extremes, can harm the innocent. Sometimes the most loving gesture is knowing when enough is enough. Chapter 3. Behind the walls of the Mughal court. Picture this. The year 1592. Inside the Red Fort of Agra, marble corridors stretch endlessly, inlaid with precious stones that catch torchlight like captured stars. The air is thick with sandalwood and rosewater. Somewhere in these opulent chambers, a prince named Khurram is about to be born. He'll grow up surrounded by unimaginable wealth, but also by deadly political games that could destroy him before his first birthday. The Mughal Empire in 1592 controlled more wealth than most of Europe combined. Trade routes brought silk from China, spices from the Indies, pearls from the Persian Gulf. But this wasn't just about money. It was about power that stretched across a subcontinent. Emperor Akbar ruled over 100 million people. His court spoke Persian, Arabic, Hindi, and Turkish. Artists, poets, and scholars traveled thousands of miles just hoping for royal patronage. This was the world baby Khurram entered. Royal children didn't have childhoods as we'd recognize them. From birth, they were pawns in an elaborate chess game. Wet nurses were chosen for their family loyalties. Tutors were selected based on which faction they supported. Even the servants who rocked Prince Khurram to sleep were reporting his development to different court officials. By age 5, he'd already learned that trust was a luxury princes couldn't afford. Everyone wanted something from you, or wanted you dead. The women's quarters, the zenana, were a hidden empire within the empire. Here, behind carved screens and silk curtains, royal mothers, wives, and daughters wielded power that never appeared in official histories. They arranged marriages, funded rebellions, and poisoned rivals with the same delicate precision they used to embroider prayer mats. Young Khurram's mother, Taj Bibi Bilqis Makhani, had survived these deadly politics long enough to ensure her son's birth. That alone was remarkable. Education for a Mughal prince meant mastering Persian poetry by age 7, memorizing the Quran, learning Arabic calligraphy, studying military strategy, and understanding the delicate art of court diplomacy. Khurram's tutors included some of the empire's greatest scholars, but the most important lessons happened between formal sessions, learning to read the micro-expressions of courtiers, understanding which eunuchs held real influence, knowing when a smile meant approval or marked you for elimination. This was survival training disguised as culture. The daily rhythms of court life followed ancient Persian traditions mixed with Islamic customs. Dawn prayers echoed through marble halls. Breakfast might include 40 different dishes served on gold plates. Morning audiences where petitioners travelled months just to kneel before the emperor for 30 seconds. Afternoon hunts where political alliances were forged between tiger kills. Evening sessions of poetry and music that could last until midnight. This wasn't luxury, it was theatre designed to demonstrate divine authority. Marriage in the Mughal court was never about love, it was about empire building. Princesses were traded like precious commodities to cement alliances with regional governors or foreign rulers. They might meet their husbands for the first time at their wedding ceremony. Some never met them at all, married by proxy to men hundreds of miles away. These weren't romantic fairy tales, they were business contracts written in bridal jewelry and sealed with political hostages disguised as children. But here's what makes Shah Jahan's story different. Genuine love occasionally broke through these calculated arrangements. It was rare enough to be shocking. When it happened, court chroniclers noted it, like they'd record an earthquake or a comet. Most emperors maintained dozens of wives, each representing a different political alliance. They might visit them dutifully, father children, exchange pleasantries, but to actually fall in love with one woman, to prefer her company above all others, this was revolutionary behavior for royalty. The palace architecture itself reflected this separation between duty and desire. Public durbar halls where the emperor held court were designed to inspire awe and distance. Throne rooms with 40-foot ceilings, walls inlaid with semi-precious stones, carpets worth more than most villages earned in a lifetime. But the private quarters told a different story. Here, in intimate chambers behind locked doors, emperors could drop their masks. Here, occasionally, political marriages might transform into something warmer, something real. Young Khurram grew up watching his father Jahangir navigate these contradictions. The emperor maintained a massive harem, dozens of wives, hundreds of concubines, but everyone at court knew he genuinely loved Nissa, later known as Nur Jahan. She wasn't just another wife, she was his political partner, his intellectual equal, his trusted confidant. Their relationship offered Khurram a model for what royal marriage could become when political necessity aligned with personal affection. The prince learned early that love, in the royal context, was dangerous. It created vulnerabilities enemies could exploit. A beloved wife could be poisoned. Favorite children could be kidnapped. Emotional attachments gave rivals leverage against you, so most emperors kept their hearts carefully guarded, spreading their affections strategically across multiple wives and concubines. This wasn't cruelty, it was survival. But it also created a world where authentic intimacy became almost impossible to achieve or sustain. Court entertainment reflected these tensions between public grandeur and private longing. Evening sessions featured musicians, dancers and poets who specialized in ghazals, verses about impossible love, separation and desire. These weren't just performances, they were safe spaces for exploring emotions that had no place in political life. Emperor could listen to songs about heartbreak without admitting he'd ever experienced it. Art became the outlet for feelings too dangerous to express directly. The servants who staffed these intimate spaces held extraordinary power. Eunuchs who could move freely between male and female quarters, carried messages, arranged secret meetings, and brokered delicate negotiations. A trusted servant might know more about the emperor's true feelings than his official wives did. These weren't just domestic workers, they were confidential agents in the empire's most sensitive operations. Their discretion could preserve dynasties. Their betrayal could topple empires. By adolescence, Prince Khurram understood the rules of this world perfectly. Marriage would be arranged for political advantage. Love, if it came at all, would be secondary to duty. He'd be expected to maintain multiple wives, father numerous children, and never show preference strong enough to create factional jealousies. These weren't just social expectations, they were survival strategies developed over centuries of royal bloodshed. Yet something in him resisted this calculated approach to intimacy. The stage was being set for something unprecedented. A prince who'd grown up understanding the political necessity of emotional distance, but who'd also witnessed his father's genuine partnership with Nur Jahan. A young man raised in traditions that treated marriage as business, but educated in Persian poetry that celebrated passionate devotion. All the contradictions of Mughal court culture were crystallizing in one person. preparing him for a love that would defy every rule he'd been taught. In 1607, Prince Khurram was 15 years old, politically sophisticated beyond his years, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. The annual Mini Bazaar was approaching, a private market where royal women could shop without their veils, where carefully arranged meetings between eligible nobles might occur. It was supposed to be routine court socializing. Instead, it would become the moment that changed everything, when duty met desire, and the future Shah Jahan first saw Arjumand Banu Begum. Chapter 4. Love at First Sight, the tale of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz. In 1607, the Mughal Empire was the richest in the world. Its capital, Agra, hummed with Persian poetry, Islamic scholarship, and Indian artistry. Prince Khurram, later Shah Jahan, was 14, third son of Emperor Jahangir, raised in a world where marriages were political tools, where princes maintained harems, where love was luxury few could afford. But sometimes, even in the most calculated environments, something unexpected happens, something that changes everything. The Mina Bazaar was no ordinary market. Once a year, the royal women could shop unveiled, free from purdah restrictions that normally kept them hidden. Silk merchants spread their finest fabrics. Jewelers displayed emeralds from Kashmir, rubies from Burma. The air smelled like rosewater and sandalwood. Princess and noble daughters moved freely, choosing whatever caught their eye. For one day, the rigid protocols relaxed. It was here, in this temporary world of freedom, that Prince Khurram first saw her. Arjumand Banu Begum, 15 years old, daughter of Asaf Khan, a Persian nobleman who served the emperor. Court chronicles describe her as intelligent, graceful, with eyes that seemed to hold entire conversations. She was examining a piece of crystal, turning it to catch the light, when Prince Khurram walked past her stall. He stopped, stared. Later, he would tell his closest friend it felt like recognition, like remembering someone he'd somehow forgotten. Love at first sight sounds like fairy tales, but sometimes it's just truth. What happened next was unprecedented. Prince Khurram didn't flirt or send subtle messages through intermediaries. He approached his father that very evening and asked permission to marry Arjumand. Immediately, Jahangir was stunned. Royal marriages took months of negotiation, political advantages had to be weighed, dowries calculated, but his son seemed transformed, different. The emperor agreed to a betrothal, though tradition required they wait 5 years before marriage. 5 years to see if this sudden infatuation would last. It would. The waiting period wasn't empty time. Arjumand was moved to the imperial palace, given apartments near the royal quarters. She and Prince Khurram could meet, under supervision, for carefully orchestrated visits. Court ladies chaperoned their walks through the palace gardens. They played chess, discussed poetry. He brought her books, Persian love verses by Hafez, philosophical texts that most royal women weren't allowed to read. She was brilliant, quick with words, unafraid to disagree with him. This wasn't just physical attraction, this was intellectual partnership. But the Mughal court was never simple. Every relationship had political implications. Arjumand's father, Asaf Khan, was shrewd. He saw opportunity in his daughter's romance. Her brother, Shah Jahan, was already rising in court ranks. If Arjumand became Prince Khurram's primary wife, not just another political marriage, their family's influence would grow enormously. Other nobles watched nervously. The prince's sudden devotion to one woman threatened traditional power structures. Marriages were supposed to create multiple alliances. This exclusive attachment was dangerous. During their 5-year betrothal, Prince Khurram proved his devotion in practical ways. When court ceremonies required him to dance with other noble daughters, traditional diplomatic courtesy, he participated minimally, polite but distant. His attention remained fixed on Arjumand. He commissioned poets to write verses about her. Not generic royal flattery, but specific details, her laugh, the way she tilted her head when thinking, how she could silence a room not through beauty alone, but through the force of her presence. This wasn't performance, this was obsession. The political complications grew more complex. Emperor Jahangir's court was divided between Persian-influenced nobles and traditional Mughal families. Arjumand's Persian heritage aligned Prince Khurram with one faction. His brothers, potential rivals for succession, aligned with others. Every poem he commissioned for her, every public display of devotion, sent political messages. His exclusive attention to one woman suggested he might rule differently than his polygamous ancestors. Some courtiers saw this as weakness, others saw dangerous idealism. Everyone understood the implications. In 1612, 5 years after their first meeting, Prince Khurram and Arjumand finally married. The wedding lasted for days. Elephants carried silver howdahs through Agra's streets. Fireworks lit the night sky. But the most significant moment was private, when she received her new name, Mumtaz Mahal, beloved of the palace, crown of the palace, names chosen by her husband, not by court protocol. This wasn't just a wedding, this was a public declaration that she would be different from all his other wives. She would be his partner. Most Mughal empresses lived in secluded luxury, influencing politics through indirect channels. Mumtaz Mahal broke this pattern immediately. She accompanied Prince Khurram on military campaigns, living in battlefield tents while pregnant. She reviewed state documents, held audiences with female petitioners. Other wives of Mughal princes maintained separate courts, competing for attention and resources. Mumtaz Mahal had no rivals. Her husband never spent a night apart from her, unless military duty absolutely required it. This was unprecedented, and it worried many people. Their first years of marriage coincided with Prince Khurram's military campaigns across the Deccan. Traditional royal wives would have remained safe in palace quarters. Mumtaz insisted on travelling with him. She gave birth to their first children in military camps, brutal conditions for a princess accustomed to palace luxury. But she never complained. Court chroniclers noted her resilience, her ability to maintain royal dignity while living in tents. Her husband's devotion grew deeper. She wasn't just beautiful or intelligent. She was brave. She was his genuine partner. By 1628, when Prince Khurram became Emperor Shah Jahan, their partnership was the foundation of imperial power. Mumtaz Mahal held the official imperial seal, meaning she could approve state documents in her own right. She managed the imperial household, oversaw the education of their children. Foreign ambassadors understood that gaining her support was essential for successful negotiations. She had become more than beloved wife. She was co-ruler. This level of partnership between Mughal emperor and empress was completely without precedent. It would prove both wonderful and dangerous. Their love story wasn't perfect. Mumtaz endured 14 pregnancies in 19 years of marriage. Only 7 children survived infancy. The physical toll was enormous, especially combined with constant travel on military campaigns. She grew thin, frequently exhausted, but their emotional bond remained unshakable. Court observers noted how Shah Jahan's entire demeanor changed when she entered a room, how he sought her opinion on every important decision, how they communicated through glances across crowded throne rooms. This wasn't just royal marriage, this was genuine partnership. The intensity of their connection worried court advisors. Emperors weren't supposed to be so completely devoted to one person. It made succession planning complicated. What would happen if something happened to her? It gave one family, her Persian relatives, enormous influence. It meant other political alliances went unnurtured, but Shah Jahan couldn't moderate his feelings. Mumtaz Mahal wasn't just his wife, she was his closest advisor, his intellectual equal, his emotional anchor. 21 years after that first glimpse in the Meena Bazaar, she remained the center of his world. In 1631, Mumtaz Mahal was 38, still traveling with Shah Jahan on military campaigns, still sharing the hardships of imperial life, still bearing children despite the toll on her health. Court physicians had begun to worry privately about her strength. She had lost weight, seemed more fragile. But she never complained, never asked to remain safely in the palace. Their love story had become the stuff of court legend. But legends, sometimes, exact terrible prices. What happened next would transform their perfect partnership into the world's most famous monument to grief. This was love in its purest form, and its most dangerous. Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal had created something unprecedented in Mughal history, a marriage of genuine equals, built on mutual respect, intellectual partnership, and unwavering devotion. For 21 years, their love had been their strength. But love this intense, this complete, this all-consuming, when it's broken, the pieces can cut everything around them. Their fairy tale was about to become something much darker, something that would shake an empire and create the world's most beautiful monument to human grief. Chapter 5, Mumtaz, More Than a Queen. For 19 years, she was never just his wife. In an empire where royal marriages were political contracts, where emperors collected wives like jewels, Arjumand Banu Begum, later crowned Mumtaz Mahal, became something unprecedented. Shah Jahan's equal, his confidante. The woman who held half his power and all his heart. This is the story of how love, lived at the highest stakes, can become both beautiful and dangerous. Picture the Mughal court in 1612. Palace corridors where whispers carried more weight than swords. Emperors traditionally kept their wives in carefully guarded quarters, consulting them rarely, if ever, on matters of state. But from their wedding night, Mumtaz travelled wherever Shah Jahan went, to war councils, military camps, diplomatic meetings. Courtiers watched, amazed and sometimes scandalized, as she sat beside him during official audiences. She wasn't just present, she was participating. The imperial seal, that small piece of carved stone that validated every official document in the empire. For centuries, emperors guarded it jealously, the ultimate symbol of absolute power. Shah Jahan did something revolutionary. He gave Mumtaz her own seal. Court records show her signature on land grants, military orders, trade agreements. She wasn't just witnessing history, she was writing it. Palace scribes called her Mumtaz Mahal, the chosen one of the palace. But power came with a price measured in miles and months. While other royal wives remained in cool marble palaces, Mumtaz lived in military tents. She crossed rivers on boats during monsoons, rode through mountain passes while pregnant, slept on campaign beds as cannons fired in distant valleys. Year after year she chose this dangerous life, not because she had to, because leaving Shah Jahan's side felt impossible. 14 pregnancies. Think about that number. In an age when one difficult birth could mean death, when medicine meant prayer and herbal remedies, Mumtaz carried 14 children in 19 years of marriage. 7 lived, 7 tiny graves scattered across the empire's history. Each pregnancy weakened her, each campaign march, each sleepless night in military tents, each month away from proper medical care, her body kept a careful accounting. The court physicians warned her. Privately, desperately, they begged Shah Jahan to leave his wife behind on campaigns. Her health was failing, her pregnancies growing more difficult, but Mumtaz refused to stay behind. She'd rather risk everything than lose her place at his side. Love had become more important than safety, partnership more precious than her own life. She made a choice that would echo through centuries. June 1631, Burhanpur, a military outpost in the Deccan Plateau. Shah Jahan was campaigning against rebellious kingdoms in the south. Mumtaz, 8 months pregnant with their 14th child, insisted on coming along. The summer heat was brutal, the camp conditions primitive, but she wouldn't hear of staying in Agra. Where he went, she followed. Even now, even when walking had become painful and rest impossible. Dawn, June 17th. Labour began suddenly, violently, in a canvas tent instead of a palace, with military surgeons instead of imperial physicians. For 30 hours, Mumtaz fought to bring their daughter into the world. Shah Jahan paced outside, listening to sounds no emperor should hear. When the baby's cries finally came, relief lasted only moments. Something was wrong, terribly, irreversibly wrong. Blood. Too much blood. The kind that doesn't stop, no matter what medicines are tried, what prayers are offered. Mumtaz knew immediately. She'd seen enough births, enough deaths to recognize the signs. At 38, after 19 years as empress of the world's richest empire, she was dying in a military tent 1,000 miles from home. Her fingers, still warm, reached for Shah Jahan's hand. What do you say when you know these are your last words? When 19 years of shared mornings, whispered plans, midnight conversations must be compressed into minutes. Mumtaz's voice, growing weaker, carried 2 final requests. Not pleas, commands. She was still giving orders, still protecting their future, even as her own slipped away. The first promise would break his heart. The second would change the world. Never remarry. That was the first promise. She knew the pressures he'd face, political marriages, alliances through royal weddings, the empire's expectations. But she asked for something unprecedented in Mughal tradition, that he love only her memory, that their partnership, even broken by death, remained sacred. Shah Jahan's tears fell on her fingers as he nodded, a promise he would later break, but meant completely in that moment. The second promise seemed impossible. "Build me something beautiful," she whispered. "Something the world will remember forever. Not just a tomb, a poem written in marble. A garden where love becomes architecture, where people will come centuries from now and understand what we had." Her voice was fading, but her vision was crystal clear. She was commissioning her own memorial, designing it with her final breaths. "Make it perfect," she said. "Make it so beautiful that people forget every other monument ever built. White marble that catches moonlight, gardens that bloom forever." water that reflects the sky. Make it tell our story, not of loss, but of what we built together. Her hand squeezed his one last time, her eyes closed. The woman who had been his queen, his advisor, his partner, his heart, was gone. Silence filled the tent. Outside, the camp continued its routine, soldiers sharpening weapons, horses being fed, morning prayers called from makeshift mosques. Inside, an empire had just lost its heart. Shah Jahan held her hand until it grew cold. The man who commanded armies, who ruled a territory spanning from Afghanistan to southern India, was suddenly powerless against the one force no emperor could control. For 8 days he refused all food, locked himself away. When he finally emerged, courtiers gasped. His hair had turned completely white, his back bent as though carrying invisible weight. At 59 he looked ancient. The transformation was so complete that some wondered if this broken man could still rule an empire. But in his grief, a dangerous obsession was already forming, a promise that would consume everything. Mumtaz Mahal's body was temporarily buried in Burhanpur, but this was never meant to be her final resting place. Shah Jahan began planning something unprecedented, a memorial so magnificent it would bankrupt the empire, spark rebellions, and eventually cost him his throne. Her final words had planted a seed that would grow into the world's most beautiful monument, and the most destructive promise in history. Chapter 6. Shah Jahan's maddening grief. The moment Mumtaz drew her last breath, something inside Shah Jahan shattered completely. Court chroniclers described a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a sob, that echoed through the military camp at Burhanpur. The emperor of the world's richest empire fell to his knees beside her body, clutching her still warm hand, whispering promises in Persian that would soon reshape an entire civilization. His grief wasn't just personal anymore, it was about to become imperial policy. When Shah Jahan finally stumbled from that tent, his closest advisors barely recognized him. The man who'd entered as a robust 40-year-old emerged looking ancient. His jet-black beard had streaks of silver that weren't there the day before. His shoulders curved inward, as if carrying invisible weight. Court artists later noted they had to completely revise their portrait sketches. The emperor's face had gained 20 years in 8 hours. Grief, it seemed, could age flesh faster than time itself. For 8 days, Shah Jahan locked himself in his chambers, refusing all food, all counsel, all acknowledgement of the empire that still needed governing. Servants left plates outside his door that remained untouched. Ministers gathered in worried clusters, whispering about succession plans. The Mughal Empire, vast, complex, demanding constant attention, simply waited while its emperor wrestled with a grief so consuming. It threatened to swallow everything around him. Love, unchecked, was becoming something dangerous. When Shah Jahan finally emerged, his first imperial decree stunned the court. No music would play anywhere in the empire for 2 full years. No celebrations, no festivals, no weddings with traditional joy. Perfumes were banned, wearing bright colors forbidden. Even the sound of laughter became suspect. Imagine an empire stretching from Afghanistan to Bengal, home to millions of people, officially ordered into mourning for one woman's death. Personal grief had become state mandate. Mumtaz had extracted 2 promises from her dying husband: never marry again, which he'd quietly broken within 2 years for political necessity, and build her a memorial so magnificent the world would never forget their love. That second promise consumed him completely. Late into the nights, he'd pace his chambers, sketching impossible architectural dreams, calculating dimensions that defied engineering logic. His architects learned to fear those midnight summons. Another revision, another grandiose addition to an already impossible vision. The memorial couldn't just be beautiful, it had to be perfect. Shah Jahan rejected dozens of designs, dismissed master architects, demanded revisions that made grown men weep with frustration. The structure needed to mirror paradise itself, white marble that would catch every phase of moonlight, inlay work so intricate it would take lifetimes to complete. This wasn't architecture anymore, it was obsession dressed in devotion. Every detail had to honor Mumtaz's memory, regardless of cost or consequence. Shah Jahan's vision required materials from across the known world. White marble from Makrana in Rajasthan, jade from China, turquoise from Tibet, sapphires from Ceylon, carnelian from Arabia. Each precious stone had to be perfect, each marble block flawless. Imperial agents scoured trade routes, commandeering the finest materials, regardless of existing contracts or promises. Local rulers found their treasures requisitioned in the name of eternal love. The emperor's grief was becoming everyone else's burden. Construction began in 1632, with 20,000 conscripted workers, artisans, labourers, engineers, decorators. Many came willingly, drawn by generous wages. Others were simply ordered to report. The work camps sprawled along the Yamuna River, a temporary city dedicated to one impossible dream. Master craftsmen from Persia shared techniques with Indian stoneworkers. Everyone understood this project would define their lifetime. Success meant imperial favour. Failure, well, failure wasn't discussed in Shah Jahan's presence anymore. The scale defied comprehension. Foundation work alone required digging 50 feet down, filling the excavation with stone and rubble to create an earthquake-resistant base. The main dome needed engineering techniques that hadn't been attempted before. Scaffolding reached impossible heights. Ramps for hauling marble blocks stretched for miles. This wasn't just a mausoleum, it was a testament to what unlimited power and unlimited grief could accomplish when logic stepped aside. Every measurement had to honor perfection. Working conditions grew brutal as Shah Jahan's impatience intensified. Summer heat claimed lives. Workers collapsed from exhaustion. Scaffolding accidents became routine. The emperor's grief demanded speed that safety couldn't match. Families received compensation for lost fathers and sons, but the work never slowed. Court records mention hundreds of deaths, though exact numbers were carefully obscured. Love's monument was being built on a foundation of other people's suffering, a contradiction nobody dared mention aloud. The imperial treasury hemorrhaged money at unprecedented rates. 32 million rupees, equivalent to over $1 billion today, but representing a much larger portion of the empire's total wealth. Provinces that hadn't raised taxes in decades suddenly faced crushing new levies. Trade routes were diverted to serve construction needs. Regional governors sent increasingly desperate reports about local unrest. The emperor's memorial to love was bankrupting the empire that had made it possible. Rebellions sparked in distant provinces as tax burdens became unbearable. Local rulers who'd served the Mughals loyally for generations began questioning their allegiance. Why should their people starve to fund one man's grief? Shah Jahan dispatched armies to quell uprisings, spending even more money the treasury couldn't afford. Each rebellion crushed meant another region alienated, another crack in imperial unity. The monument to eternal love was fracturing the empire it was meant to honor. Prince Aurangzeb watched his father's obsession with growing alarm. The empire's finances were collapsing, regional stability crumbling, yet Shah Jahan's focus remained fixed on marble inlay patterns and dome proportions. Imperial councils became exercises in architectural perfectionism rather than governance. Aurangzeb saw the future clearly. Continued obsession meant imperial collapse. His father's love for Mumtaz was destroying everything she'd helped him build during their 19 years together. Something had to change. As if the Taj Mahal wasn't extravagant enough, Shah Jahan planned a second mausoleum for himself, identical in scale, but carved from black marble, connected to Mumtaz's white tomb by a silver bridge spanning the Yamuna River. The cost would have dwarfed even the first monument. This was where grief finally overreached itself, where love became megalomania, where devotion transformed into destructive narcissism. Aurangzeb realized his father had lost all connection to reality. In 1658, Aurangzeb made his move. A military coup, swift and decisive, removed his father from power and confined him to Agra Fort. Shah Jahan's final 8 years were spent imprisoned in an octagonal tower, with one window facing the Taj Mahal. He could see his tribute to Mumtaz, but never visit it again. His grief had consumed an empire, alienated his children, and ultimately destroyed his own reign. Love, unchecked by wisdom, had become its own worst enemy. Shah Jahan died in 1666, still gazing toward Mumtaz's tomb from his prison window. His body was placed beside hers in the very monument that had cost him everything, the only asymmetrical element in the Taj Mahal's perfect design, because it was built for her alone. His grief had created the world's most beautiful symbol of love, but at a price that transformed devotion into destruction. Sometimes the grandest gestures of love cause the greatest harm to everyone we claim to cherish. Chapter 7. Breaking Ground. The Start of a Monument. Spring of 1632, 1 year after Mumtaz's death, Shah Jahan stood at the banks of the Yamuna River, staring at an empty plot of land. His architects had drawn their plans. His treasury officials had calculated impossible numbers. His grief had crystallized into something more dangerous than sorrow, an obsession that would consume an empire. The construction of the Taj Mahal was about to begin. The site Shah Jahan chose was perfect in its symbolism. a bend in the river where morning light would catch the white marble just so. But perfection came with a price. Entire villages were relocated. Families who had lived here for generations were given compensation, if they were lucky. The land had to be raised, leveled, prepared for foundations that would support the weight of eternity. Even the earth itself had to be reshaped for love. 20,000 workers. That number doesn't capture the reality, the sheer human mass converging on Agra. Stonemasons from Bukhara, inlay specialists from Shiraz, calligraphers from Syria. They came by foot, by cart, by riverboat. Some came willingly, drawn by promises of good wages. Others were conscripted, torn from their own lives to serve an emperor's grief. By summer's end, a city of workers had sprung up around the construction site, the marble quarries of Makrana, 300 miles south. Here, in the desert heat of Rajasthan, men worked in conditions that would break most people today, chiseling blocks from living rock, each piece weighing tons. The dust got into everything: lungs, eyes, the folds of their clothes. Many developed what we now know as silicosis, their breathing growing laboured as marble dust slowly filled their chest cavities. Getting the marble from quarry to construction site was its own nightmare. Massive stone blocks loaded onto wooden carts pulled by teams of oxen. The journey took weeks. Roads that weren't built for such weight crumbled under the load, wheels broke, oxen collapsed. When a cart overturned, crushing whoever was nearby, work continued. There was a schedule to keep. A dead empress was waiting for her monument. Shah Jahan visited the site almost daily, his obsession growing with each passing month. He would stand for hours, pointing out imperfections invisible to anyone else. A marble block with the slightest colour variation was rejected. Inlay work that was merely excellent was torn out and redone. His courtiers watched nervously as their emperor became someone they barely recognised, a man possessed by the ghost of his wife. The working conditions were brutal by any measure. Dawn to dusk labour under the merciless Indian sun. Water was scarce, medical care non-existent. When men fell from scaffolding, their bodies were quietly removed and work continued. The official records don't mention the death toll, but local stories passed down through generations speak of hundreds lost in just the first year. The foundation of the Taj Mahal was laid in blood. The cost was staggering from day one. Each month, the imperial treasury hemorrhaged silver, the finest materials from across Asia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, jade from China, coral from the Arabian Sea. Every precious stone had to be transported over impossible distances, through mountain passes and desert routes. Caravans carrying Taj Mahal materials became targets for bandits who knew exactly how valuable their cargo was. Prince Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan's son, watched his father's obsession with growing alarm. The empire's military campaigns were being postponed. Tax revenues that should have gone to maintaining roads, funding armies, supporting drought relief were all flowing toward Agra. Provincial governors sent increasingly desperate reports about unrest. But Shah Jahan only cared about one thing: the perfect curve of a marble dome against the sky. By winter of 1632, the first signs of what was coming were clear. Grain prices rising across the empire as resources were diverted to feed the massive workforce. Skilled craftsmen abandoning their regular trades, drawn by Taj Mahal wages, leaving shortages in other industries. The empire's economic balance was shifting, all flowing toward one riverside construction site where an emperor's grief was taking physical form. The foundation work alone took nearly 2 years, digging deep into the riverbank soil, laying stone after stone in precise patterns. But it was never deep enough, never perfect enough for Shah Jahan. Entire sections were torn up and rebuilt when he decided the orientation was wrong by a few degrees. The workers began to whisper that their emperor had lost his mind, that love had driven him to madness. Local families watched their sons disappear into the Taj Mahal project. Some returned after months with stories of backbreaking labour and decent wages. Others never came home at all. The lucky ones died quickly in accidents. The unlucky ones died slowly from exhaustion, heat stroke, or diseases that spread through the overcrowded worker camps. Mothers learned not to ask too many questions about where their boys had gone. The administrative machinery of the empire began to buckle under the project's demands. Court sessions were shorter because Shah Jahan's attention was elsewhere. Military appointments were delayed. Trade disputes went unresolved. The Mughal Empire had become a vast machine with one purpose: feeding materials, money, and human lives into the construction site at Agra. Everything else was secondary to the monument taking shape on the riverbank. Regional rebellions that might have been easily handled with quick military responses were left to fester because the treasury couldn't fund proper campaigns. The Deccan Plateau, always restless under Mughal rule, began to slip from imperial control. Shah Jahan's advisors pleaded with him to focus on governing, but he would only listen to reports about marble quality and construction progress. His empire was fracturing while he built a tomb. By 1634, 2 years in, the true scale of what Shah Jahan had begun was becoming clear. This wasn't just a building project, it was a transformation of the entire Mughal economy. Every decision, every resource allocation, every policy choice was filtered through one question: does this serve the Taj Mahal? The empire that had once stretched from Afghanistan to the Deccan was slowly becoming a support system for one man's monument to grief. The workers kept coming, kept dying, kept building. The marble kept arriving from Rajasthan, despite the human cost of quarrying and transport. And slowly, impossibly, something beautiful began to take shape on the riverbank. But everyone who looked closely could see the truth. This monument to love was being built on a foundation of suffering. The most beautiful building in the world was already stained with blood before the first dome was complete. Chapter 8: The Labour of Love. By 1632, Shah Jahan's grief had crystallized into something else entirely: obsession. What began as love's memorial would become an empire's burden. The Taj Mahal wasn't built by romantic devotion alone, it was carved from human suffering, financed by crushing taxes, and paid for with lives most people never think about when they see those perfect white domes gleaming in photographs today. The marble came from Makrana, 300 miles southwest of Agra, pure white stone, formed over millions of years in Rajasthan's quarries, the same stone that would later build the Victoria Memorial. Teams of workers spent months just selecting the perfect blocks. Each piece had to be flawless. No veins, no color variations, just pristine white marble that would catch moonlight exactly as Shah Jahan imagined. Moving that marble was a feat of brutal logistics. Massive blocks weighing several tons each, loaded onto ox-drawn carts for the journey to Agra. The road from Makrana became a trail of broken axles and exhausted animals. During monsoon season, carts sank into mud. In summer heat, oxen collapsed. Workers died hauling stones up specially built ramps that are lost to history now. But marble was just the foundation. Shah Jahan wanted something unprecedented: inlay work using semi-precious stones from across the known world: cornelian from Arabia, turquoise from Tibet, jade from China, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Each stone required its own supply chain, its own network of traders willing to transport delicate materials across mountains, deserts and oceans for one man's monument. The procurement process alone employed thousands: stone selectors who could spot flaws invisible to untrained eyes, traders who knew which mountain passes stayed open longest, ship captains willing to risk monsoons carrying precious cargo. Each transaction was recorded in ledgers that still survive today, meticulous accounts of an empire spending itself into weakness, one beautiful stone at a time. 22,000 workers descended on Agra. Not volunteers, conscripted labourers from across the Mughal territories, craftsmen torn from their villages, stone carvers separated from their families. They lived in temporary camps outside the construction site, sleeping in structures that were torn down the moment the Taj was completed. No permanent record of where they came from or what happened to them after. The working conditions were merciless. Construction continued through Agra's scorching summers. When temperatures reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit, workers started before dawn, trying to finish the heaviest labour before the sun became unbearable. Many collapsed from heat exhaustion. Others fell from scaffolding that rose over 200 feet above the Yamuna River. The lucky ones died quickly. Master craftsman Ustad Ahmed Lahari designed intricate pulley systems to lift marble blocks into place. But human muscle still powered most of the work, teams of men hauling stones up ramps using rope and determination. The main dome alone required precisely cut marble pieces fitted together like an enormous puzzle. One mistake meant starting over, and someone usually died in the process. The inlay work demanded microscopic precision. Each flower pattern required hundreds of tiny stone pieces, cut to fit together seamlessly. Craftsmen worked by candlelight, ruining their eyesight, creating decorations most visitors today see from too far away to appreciate. The pietra dura technique had never been attempted on this scale. They were inventing methods as they went, learning from their mistakes. Shah Jahan inspected progress personally, arriving unannounced to examine details with a magnifying glass. Imperfect work was torn out and redone. Workers who disappointed him were flogged. Some were executed. Court chroniclers recorded his increasing impatience as years passed. his desperation to see Mumtaz's memorial completed before his own death. Love had become something darker, more demanding. The financial burden crushed the empire. Tax collectors squeezed harder. Regions that once sent tribute began rebelling instead. The treasury that Akbar and Jahangir had filled over decades emptied to pay for one woman's tomb. Peasants starved while artisans carved flowers into walls. Trade routes were diverted to supply Shah Jahan's obsession. The entire economy warped around marble and grief. By 1650, 18 years into construction, people whispered about the emperor's madness. He planned an identical black marble mausoleum for himself across the river, connected by a silver bridge. The cost would have bankrupted what remained of the treasury. His son Aurangzeb watched the empire crumbling and began plotting rebellion. Love was destroying everything Shah Jahan claimed to protect. The gardens required their own engineering miracle. Water channels that would flow in perfect symmetry, fountains that would function for centuries, hydraulic systems drawing water from the Yamuna River, pumping it through underground pipes to feed pools and cascades. Even the landscaping served Shah Jahan's vision, paradise on earth, exactly as Islamic tradition promised the faithful after death. When construction finally ended in 1654, the celebration lasted 3 days, but for workers, completion meant unemployment. No pensions, no compensation for injuries, no recognition for sacrifice. They scattered back to villages that had forgotten them, carrying scars and stories no one wanted to hear. The lucky ones lived to see their grandchildren. Many didn't live to see home. Legend claims Shah Jahan cut off workers' hands so they could never build anything as beautiful again. Not true, but the real story is somehow worse. He simply forgot they existed once their usefulness ended. 22 years of their lives consumed building his monument to love. Their names aren't carved in marble anywhere. History remembers the emperor's grief, not theirs. The finished Taj Mahal was perfect, every proportion calculated, every sightline planned. Moonlight reflected exactly as Shah Jahan dreamed during those grief-mad early years after Mumtaz's death. But perfection had required imperfect means, broken lives, bankrupted treasury, son turned against father. Love's monument stood complete. The empire it nearly destroyed was already beginning to crumble underneath its beautiful shadow. Chapter 9. An Empire in Ruins. The Economic Consequences. By 1650, the Taj Mahal's construction had consumed nearly 2 decades of the Mughal Empire's wealth. What started as one man's monument to love had become something else entirely, a financial catastrophe that would reshape an empire. The marble wonder rising from Agra's riverbank cast a shadow far beyond its perfect walls. The numbers tell a brutal story: 32 million rupees, roughly $1 billion in today's money, but representing perhaps 10% of the empire's entire annual revenue. For comparison, that's like the United States spending $400 billion on a single building. The imperial treasury, once overflowing with gold and silver, had been bled dry marble block by marble block. Shah Jahan's finance ministers watched the empire's books with growing alarm. Tax collection became increasingly desperate. Villages that had paid reasonable tributes for generations suddenly faced demands double, sometimes triple their normal burden. Farmers who once kept enough grain to feed their families through winter found imperial collectors taking everything, leaving barely enough seed for the next planting season. The white marble came from Makrana quarries in Rajasthan, over 200 miles away. Every block required teams of oxen, specially built carts, and weeks of dangerous transport. The logistics alone consumed vast resources. Roads had to be reinforced, bridges built, entire supply chains created just to move stone. Meanwhile, other imperial projects, roads, irrigation systems, defensive walls, went unfunded. By 1645, rebellions sparked across the empire like fires in dry grass. The Bundelar Rajputs rose in Orkha. The Jats rebelled in the Mathura region. The Sikhs grew restless in Punjab. Each uprising required military campaigns, more expense, more taxation to fund the soldiers needed to maintain order. The empire that had once expanded through strength now struggled to hold its existing territories. Court records from this period reveal growing tension between Shah Jahan and his sons. Prince Aurangzeb, the third son, watched the empire's decline with calculating eyes. Unlike his poetic father, Aurangzeb possessed a practical mind that understood numbers. He saw how the Taj Mahal's beauty came at the cost of military readiness, how grief had become governance, how love had become financial ruin. The irony wasn't lost on the empire's subjects. They paid crushing taxes to build a tomb for a woman most had never heard of. while their own loved ones died from diseases that better-funded hospitals might have prevented. Village wells went unrepaired, granaries remained empty, infrastructure crumbled. Yet still the marble workers carved intricate flowers into walls that would outlast the empire itself. But Shah Jahan's obsession had not reached its peak. Even as the Taj Mahal neared completion, he began planning something even more audacious, an identical mausoleum for himself. This one would be built from black marble, standing across the Yamuna River, connected to Mumtaz's white tomb by a silver bridge. The estimated cost, another 20 million rupees, the empire simply didn't have. The black marble mausoleum would have been magnificent. Architects drew plans for gardens that mirrored the Taj's layout in perfect symmetry. The silver bridge would have been wide enough for royal processions, a pathway between life and death, between the emperor and his beloved wife. Construction materials were ordered, land was cleared, then reality intervened in the form of an increasingly impatient son. Aurangzeb had spent his youth watching his father's transformation from capable ruler to grief-obsessed monument builder. Born in 1618, he'd grown up during the empire's golden age, then witnessed its slow financial hemorrhage. Unlike his older brothers who preferred poetry and palace intrigue, Aurangzeb studied statecraft, military strategy, and most importantly, the empire's account books. He saw what others chose to ignore. The prince's letters from this period reveal a mind torn between filial duty and imperial responsibility. He loved his father, but despised what grief had made him. "The empire bleeds while marble flowers bloom," he wrote to his sister Jahanara in 1652. "How many real flowers might have bloomed in villages with the gold we've buried in stone?" His frustration grew with each new tax demand from Agra. By 1657, the empire faced its worst crisis in decades. The Deccan sultanates sensed Mughal weakness and began expanding northward. The Marathas under Shivaji started carving out their own kingdom. The Persians threatened the empire's western borders, yet Shah Jahan remained focused on architectural perfection, personally inspecting marble inlays while his generals begged for reinforcements and supplies. The empire needed a warrior. It had a poet. The breaking point came when Shah Jahan fell seriously ill in September 1657. Palace rumors suggested he might die, triggering the inevitable war of succession among his 4 sons. But it was the financial crisis, not the succession dispute, that made Aurangzeb's eventual victory inevitable. He alone among the brothers understood that the empire's survival required abandoning his father's expensive dreams. Aurangzeb's coup in 1658 was as much about economics as politics. His first act after imprisoning Shah Jahan was cancelling the black marble mausoleum project. The silver bridge would never be built. The mirror-image tomb would remain forever unfinished. Instead, he redirected imperial resources toward military campaigns, border defense, and the practical business of ruling an empire that stretched from Kashmir to the Deccan. From his tower prison in Agra fort, Shah Jahan could see the Taj Mahal through a small window. The monument that had cost him his empire glowed in the morning light, perfectly preserved while the kingdom that built it slowly crumbled. Perhaps in those final years, watching his masterpiece from behind stone walls, he understood the true price of turning grief into architecture. The Taj Mahal stands today as both triumph and warning, proof that even the most beautiful dreams can become destructive obsessions. Shah Jahan's love for Mumtaz was real, but his response to losing her nearly destroyed everything they'd both worked to build. Sometimes the most loving thing isn't the grandest gesture, it's knowing when enough is enough. Sweet dreams. By 1656, Prince Aurangzeb watched his father's empire crumble from within. The Taj Mahal's construction had drained treasuries that once overflowed with gold and silver. Tax collectors returned from provinces with empty hands and reports of rebellion. Villages that had prospered under earlier Mughal rule now struggled to feed their children. And still, Shah Jahan obsessed over marble inlays and perfect symmetries, lost in grief-fueled dreams while reality collapsed around him. The prince saw what his father refused to acknowledge. The numbers were devastating. 32 million rupees, nearly the empire's entire annual revenue, poured into a tomb while soldiers went unpaid and infrastructure crumbled. Aurangzeb, trained in military strategy and governance, calculated the damage with cold precision. Meanwhile, his father wandered the construction site at dawn, touching marble surfaces, adjusting the angle of minarets by inches. 2 men looking at the same empire, seeing completely different realities. One saw love made eternal, the other saw power bleeding away, drop by precious drop. The irony cuts deep when you realize Aurangzeb genuinely loved his father. Court records show years of patient correspondence. the prince gently suggesting fiscal restraint, offering to manage imperial finances, proposing military campaigns that might restore the treasury. But Shah Jahan dismissed these concerns with the wave of a jeweled hand. His son simply didn't understand the importance of creating something magnificent, something worthy of Mumtaz. Love, to Shah Jahan, required no budget, no compromise, no practical considerations whatsoever. By 1657, regional governors openly questioned imperial authority. The Deccan sultans, sensing weakness, launched raids into Mughal territory. Afghan tribes pushed south from mountain passes, testing borders that had been secure for decades. Persian armies gathered on the western frontier, eyeing prize cities like hawks circling wounded prey. And in Agra, Shah Jahan commissioned a second tomb, black marble this time, for himself, connected to Mumtaz's mausoleum by a silver bridge, the final impossible dream of a grief-stricken emperor who'd forgotten how to rule. The breaking point came during a routine court session in early 1658. Shah Jahan, now in his 60s, suddenly collapsed. Some chroniclers suggest poison, others blame exhaustion from years of sleepless nights spent planning architectural details. For 3 days he lay unconscious while princes positioned themselves for succession. Aurangzeb moved with surgical precision, securing key forts, winning over military commanders, sending messages to provincial governors. When Shah Jahan awakened, his empire had already chosen new leadership. The transition felt almost inevitable. The war of succession that followed was swift but brutal. Aurangzeb faced his brother Dara Shikoh, Shah Jahan's favoured heir and designated successor. 2 armies met at Samagar in May 1658, brother against brother, each claiming legitimate right to the peacock throne. Dara fought for artistic tradition, religious tolerance, the softer aspects of Mughal culture. Aurangzeb represented pragmatism, orthodox Islam, military strength. When the dust settled on that blood-soaked battlefield, the empire's future was decided. Practicality had defeated poetry. Survival had triumphed over sentiment. Shah Jahan's imprisonment began almost gently. Aurangzeb simply took control. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting matches, just quiet efficiency. Guards appeared at the emperor's chambers. Servants received new orders. Daily routines subtly shifted until Shah Jahan realized he was no longer giving commands, merely following them. The irony was exquisite. The man who'd built the world's most magnificent prison of love now found himself in an actual prison, watching his creation from a window he could never again approach. The tower room in Agra fort offered one mercy, a perfect view of the Taj Mahal. Every morning, Shah Jahan would wake and walk to that window, hands pressed against cold stone, gazing across the Yamuna River at his masterpiece. The white marble caught light differently at each hour, pale pink at dawn, blazing silver at noon, golden amber at sunset. From this distance he could see the whole complex, the gardens, the reflecting pools, the 4 minarets standing guard over Mumtaz's final rest. Those 8 years of imprisonment transformed Shah Jahan from emperor to memory keeper. He dictated detailed letters about Mumtaz, their first meeting at the Mina Bazaar, her laughter during desert campaigns, the way she'd fall asleep with her hand on his chest. Court scribes recorded these reminiscences, creating an archive of love that survives to this day. But between the sweet memories came bitter realization that his grand gesture had cost everything else he'd once held dear. Empire, sons, freedom, even the ability to visit his beloved's tomb. Aurangzeb visited his father exactly once during those final years. The meeting was cordial, almost formal. They discussed the monsoon, grain prices, news from distant provinces. Neither mentioned the tomb gleaming white across the river. Neither spoke of rebellion or imprisonment, or love that had grown too large for its container. When Aurangzeb rose to leave, Shah Jahan asked quietly if he might visit Mumtaz just once more before death claimed him. His son's silence was answer enough. Some boundaries, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. The seasons turned with mechanical precision outside Jahan's window. Monsoons flooded the gardens. Winter mists obscured the dome. Summer heat shimmered off marble surfaces like prayers made visible. Through it all, the former emperor watched his creation, noting how light played across its surface, how the river's level changed its reflection, how the cypress trees grew taller each year. This was his world now, reduced to a single view of perfect beauty he could never again touch or enter. During the long afternoons, Shah Jahan would recite Persian poetry to empty air, verses about separation, about lovers divided by fate, about beauty that exists only in memory. The guards learned to recognize the rhythms of his grief, how his voice would crack on certain lines, how he'd pause at windows during the golden hour when sunset painted the Taj Mahal like fire. They witnessed an emperor becoming a ghost, sustained only by the sight of love made permanent in stone. The tragic mathematics became clear with time. 22 years building the tomb, 8 years imprisoned because of it. Nearly 3 decades of his life shaped entirely by Mumtaz's death and his response to losing her. From that tower window, Shah Jahan could see the future tourists don't, how love, untempered by wisdom, becomes its own form of tyranny. His devotion had been genuine, his grief authentic, his artistic vision unparalleled. But good intentions, he learned too late, don't excuse harmful consequences. When death finally came to Shah Jahan in January 1666, he was found at his window, forehead pressed against the stone, eyes fixed on the distant tomb. His final words, recorded by attending physicians, were a whispered apology to Mumtaz for the wait, to his empire for the cost, to his sons for the burden he'd left them. In those last moments, perhaps he understood that love's greatest test isn't grand gestures, but knowing when enough sacrifice has been made. Aurangzeb honoured his father with burial beside Mumtaz in the Taj Mahal, breaking the perfect symmetry of the design, since the tomb was meant for her alone. The addition feels almost apologetic, a son's final gesture of respect to a father whose love had grown too large for the world to contain. Today, millions visit without knowing this complexity, seeing only romance, not rebellion, only devotion, not the destruction devotion can cause when it loses sight of everything else. The Taj Mahal stands today as history's most beautiful contradiction, a monument to pure love built on impure foundations, a symbol of devotion that sparked betrayal, a dream so magnificent it bankrupted reality. From Shah Jahan's tower window you could see the whole tragic arc, how grief and power, combined without wisdom, can transform the most beautiful intentions into something that costs far more than anyone ever meant to pay. Sometimes the price of perfection is everything else we value. Chapter 11. The Taj Mahal, Love versus Obsession. Picture this. 17-year-old Prince Khurram walks through the Meena Bazaar in 1607. Royal women shop here unveiled, a rare glimpse behind palace walls. Then he sees her, Arjumand Banu Begum, 15 years old, daughter of a Persian noble. Court chroniclers wrote that he became so instantly infatuated, so completely captivated, that he immediately asked his father for permission to marry. This was unusual enough that multiple historians noted it. Love at first sight. In a world where royal marriages were political calculations, they were betrothed immediately, but custom demanded waiting. 5 long years passed before Prince Khurram could marry Arju, and in 1612, she became Mumtaz Mahal, the chosen one of the palace. Most Mughal emperors collected wives like jewels, political alliances wrapped in silk, but everyone at court knew Mumtaz was different. She wasn't just another royal bride tucked away in the women's quarters. She was his companion, his confidante, the woman who would change the course of an empire simply by dying too young. For 19 years, they were inseparable. Mumtaz travelled with Shah Jahan on military campaigns, highly unusual for a royal wife. Picture her, pregnant, living in military tents, dust swirling around camp followers and war elephants. She held the imperial seal, meaning she co-signed official documents. Real political power, not ceremonial decoration. 14 pregnancies, 7 surviving children. The physical toll was enormous, but she stayed by his side, through battles, through court intrigue, through the endless responsibilities of ruling the world's richest empire. June 1631, Burhanpur. Another military campaign, another pregnancy. Mumtaz goes into labour with their 14th child. 30 hours of difficult labour in the sweltering heat of the Deccan Plateau. She delivers a daughter, but something goes wrong. Hemorrhaging begins almost immediately. The court physician shakes his head. She knows she's dying. In those final moments, she extracts 2 promises from her devastated husband. Never marry again, and build her a memorial so beautiful the world would never forget their love. Then she's gone. Shah Jahan's reaction was immediate and complete. He locked himself in his chambers for 8 days, refusing all food, all visitors, all responsibilities. When he finally emerged, courtiers were shocked. His hair had turned completely white. His back was bent like an old man's. He looked decades older, aged by grief. In little more than a week, he declared 2 years of official court mourning throughout the empire. No music, no celebrations, no joy. Then he began planning Mumtaz's memorial, and that's where love became something much darker. Construction began in 1632, but this wasn't just building a mausoleum. This was Shah Jahan becoming obsessed with creating something so magnificent it would bankrupt his empire. Over 20,000 workers were conscripted. Many were forced laborers. Working conditions were brutal in the heat of Agra. Men died in accidents, from exhaustion, from falls off the scaffolding. The white marble came from Makrana in Rajasthan, transported hundreds of miles by ox cart and elephant. Semi-precious stones imported from across Asia. Jade from China, turquoise from Tibet, carnelian from Arabia. The cost was staggering. 32 million rupees, roughly $1 billion today, but representing a much larger percentage of the Mughal treasury. The empire was being bled dry by one man's grief. Taxes increased across the realm. Provinces began rebelling against the financial burden. Meanwhile, Shah Jahan planned an identical black marble mausoleum for himself across the river, connected by a bridge. His son Aurangzeb watched the empire's finances collapse and began planning his own response to his father's devastating obsession. 22 years of construction. Think about that. An entire generation of workers spent their lives building this monument to one woman. Master craftsmen from across the Islamic world, Persian calligraphers, Turkish dome builders, Italian specialists in pietra dura inlay work. The Taj Mahal represents the peak of Mughal architecture, combining Persian, Islamic and Indian design elements into something entirely unique. Perfect symmetry, intricate inlay work, the way light plays across the white marble at different hours, a civilization's aesthetic achievement, built on a foundation of empire-shattering expense. But here's what the tour guides don't mention. The human cost, the workers who died, the families torn apart by forced labor, the provinces that starved while their tax money went to importing precious stones for inlay work. The empire weakened, made vulnerable to future invasions. Love, when combined with absolute power and unlimited resources, became something destructive. Shah Jahan's grief was real, his love for Mumtaz genuine, but his response to losing her caused enormous suffering to others. Thousands paid the price for one man's beautiful obsession. 1658. Prince Aurangzeb had watched enough. His father's obsession with monuments while the empire crumbled around them, it had to stop. He led a coup, defeated his brothers in a brutal war of succession, and made the ultimate decision. Shah Jahan was imprisoned in Agra Fort, in a tower with a window facing the Taj Mahal. For 8 years, the emperor who bankrupted his realm for love could see his wife's tomb but never visit it. He died in 1666, aged 74, still gazing across the river at his monument to grief. They buried Shah Jahan beside Mumtaz Mahal, the only element that breaks the Taj Mahal's perfect symmetry. It was designed for her alone, but they made room for him too. A single marble screen surrounds their cenotaphs in the burial chamber below. Above, millions of visitors walk through halls built by forced labor, admiring beauty created through suffering. The paradox is uncomfortable. Can something be simultaneously a testament to genuine love and a monument to destructive obsession? The answer is complex, like most truths about human nature. In Mughal culture, grand architectural gestures demonstrated power and piety. Shah Jahan's grandfather Akbar built magnificent structures, his father Jahangir too, but none approached the scale or cost of the Taj Mahal. Shah Jahan elevated personal grief to the level of state policy, transforming private loss into public expense. The financial strain contributed to the empire's eventual decline, making it vulnerable to later invasions by the Marathas and eventually the British. Love became empire-ending obsession, beautiful in marble, but devastating in consequence. Today, the Taj Mahal faces new threats. Air pollution from nearby Agra is yellowing the white marble. Acid rain eats at the intricate inlay work. Millions of tourists create vibrations that stress the foundation. There's bitter irony here. The monument built to last forever now faces deterioration from the very attention it attracts. Conservation efforts continue, but time and popularity are relentless enemies. The most famous symbol of eternal love is slowly being destroyed by love, tourist love, economic love, the kind that consumes what it claims to cherish. So what do we make of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal? Their love was genuine, 19 years of partnership, unusual in royal marriages. But his response to her death reveals how grief, unchecked by reason or restraint, can become its own form of madness. The thousands who built the Taj, the empire weakened by its cost, the son driven to rebellion, they're part of the story too, even if their names aren't carved in marble. Beauty and suffering intertwined, as they often are in human history. The Taj Mahal forces uncomfortable questions. Can something built through suffering still be beautiful? Can love taken to extremes become selfish? Perhaps the real lesson isn't about eternal devotion, but about balance. Even the most powerful feelings must be tempered by responsibility to the living. The grandest gestures aren't always the most loving. Sometimes the most loving thing is knowing when enough is enough. Sometimes love means accepting loss, rather than forcing the world to accommodate your grief. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider this paradox. The world's most famous monument to love is also a reminder that obsession, however beautifully expressed, carries a price. Shah Jahan got his eternal memorial, but at the cost of his empire, his freedom, and thousands of lives. Love and destruction, beauty and suffering, devotion and selfishness, all carved in white marble under the Indian sun. The Taj Mahal endures, magnificent and troubling, a complex truth about the human heart made visible in stone. Chapter 12. Echoes of the Past, Consequences of the Obsession. The Taj Mahal rises like a dream against the Agra skyline, but dreams have costs. Behind that perfect white marble facade lies a different story, one of broken bodies, empty treasuries, and a son watching his father's grief consume an empire. Tonight we explore what history prefers to whisper about. The price 22 million people paid for one man's monument to love. Dawn breaks over the construction site in 1635, 3 years into the project, and already the dying has begun. Workers collapse from heat exhaustion before the sun reaches its peak. The marble dust settles in their lungs like fine sand, each breath a little harder than the last. Makeshift hospitals spring up around the site, crude shelters where men cough blood onto straw mats. But the work continues. The marble quarries at Makrana, 300 miles away, imagine the sound, hammers striking stone from sunrise to sunset, the crack of rock splitting along ancient veins, men lowered into pits on ropes, their oil lamps flickering against white walls that seem to glow. Some never climb back out. Cave-ins bury entire crews. Their names aren't carved anywhere on the finished monument. Transportation becomes its own nightmare. Massive marble blocks loaded onto ox-drawn carts, wheels creaking under impossible weight. The journey to Agra takes weeks through monsoon rains that turn roads to rivers of mud. Oxen die in their harnesses. Men push carts that sink hub-deep in clay. Villages along the route are forced to provide labor, food, fresh animals. Nothing voluntary about it. At the construction site, a different kind of suffering. Master craftsmen brought from Persia, Turkey, France. They live in relative comfort, but the 20,000 laborers sleep in bamboo huts that flood during monsoons. Water sources contaminated by marble dust and human waste. Dysentery spreads like wildfire through the cramped quarters. The smell of sickness hangs over everything, sweet and rotten. The scaffolding alone kills dozens. Bamboo poles lashed together with hemp rope, reaching 200 feet into the air. Men carry buckets of mortar up narrow planks that sway in the wind. One misstep, one rotted rope, one gust of monsoon wind, and bodies fall like stones onto the marble platform below. Their blood stains the white stone until rain washes it clean. Meanwhile, in the imperial treasury, the numbers grow terrifying. Shah Jahan's finance minister presents ledgers showing expenditures that dwarf military campaigns, 32 million rupees, and climbing. That's equivalent to over $1 billion today, but representing a much larger chunk of the empire's total wealth. Tax collectors squeeze provinces harder. Peasants sell their fields to pay levies for marble they'll never see. Regional governors send increasingly desperate reports to the capital. Rebellions flare in Bengal, Gujarat, the Deccan, not grand political uprisings, but simple refusals to pay taxes meant for tomb construction. Villages abandon their land rather than surrender another season's harvest to feed an empress's memorial. The empire's edges begin to fray like worn silk. Prince Aurangzeb watches from the sidelines, calculating. His father's obsession has created opportunity. Military commanders whisper in palace corridors about unpaid wages. Provincial administrators complain about impossible tax quotas. The heir apparent begins gathering allies, promising fiscal responsibility, military strength, practical leadership, all while his father supervises marble inlay work, lost in architectural details. By 1645, 13 years into construction, the human cost becomes undeniable. Mass graves outside Agra hold workers who died of exhaustion, accidents, disease. Local villages lose entire generations of men to the project. Families survive on charity, children orphaned by marble dust and imperial ambition. But the dome rises higher each month, reflecting sunrise like a pearl. Shah Jahan announces plans for his own mausoleum, identical to Mumtaz's but carved from black marble, connected by a silver bridge. The cost estimate arrives like a death warrant for the empire's finances. Even his most loyal advisors blanch. Aurangzeb begins meeting with military commanders in private. The whispers of rebellion grow louder, more organized. The irony becomes unbearable. Shah Jahan builds this monument to eternal love, while his empire crumbles from neglect. Court musicians are dismissed to save money. Palace maintenance deferred. The Mughal military, once the subcontinent's most powerful force, operates with outdated equipment and irregular pay. All resources flow toward one perfect tomb in Agra. 1654. The Taj Mahal nears completion, 22 years after it began. The final cost, impossible to calculate precisely, but enough to have built 50 smaller palaces or equipped armies for a dozen campaigns. Meanwhile, Aurangzeb's patience finally ends. He declares his father mentally unfit to rule, launches a war against his brothers for succession rights. The final betrayal comes wrapped in duty. 1658. Aurangzeb defeats his brothers, claims the throne, and places his father under house arrest in Agra Fort. The tower room has one window. It faces west, toward the Taj Mahal. Shah Jahan can see his masterpiece across the Yamuna River, but never touch it again. 8 years of imprisonment follow. Every sunset for 8 years, the old emperor watches his wife's tomb glow pink in the dying light. The monument he built to prove eternal love has cost him everything else: his empire, his freedom, his other children. The workers' bones lie forgotten in mass graves. The treasury remains empty. His son rules efficiently, practically, without sentiment. When Shah Jahan dies in 1666, they bury him beside Mumtaz in the Taj Mahal. His tomb breaks the monument's perfect symmetry, the only flaw in an otherwise flawless design. Perhaps that's fitting. Love, taken to extremes, always leaves something broken. The most beautiful monument to devotion ever built rests on a foundation of suffering. Few remember. Chapter 13. Architectural marvel amidst devastation. The Taj Mahal rises from red sandstone walls like something from a fever dream, pure white marble. 4 minarets reaching toward heaven, a central dome that seems to float without support. But here's what most people don't realize. This breathtaking monument nearly destroyed the empire that built it. Beauty and devastation, hand in hand, love and ruin, carved in stone. This is how architectural perfection became political catastrophe. Picture the master architects gathering in 1632. Ustad Ahmad Lahari leads the team. Persian builders who understand dome construction. Islamic calligraphers who can transform prayers into art. Indian craftsmen who know how to make marble sing. They're tasked with creating something impossible, a building that captures eternal love in stone. But empires don't run on love, they run on gold. And this monument would consume both in quantities that beggar imagination. The Persian influence shows in the 4-garden layout. Charbagh, paradise divided into 4 parts by water channels. This comes from ancient Persia, where gardens represented heaven on earth. Islamic tradition provides the calligraphy flowing across marble surfaces, verses from the Quran about paradise and eternal life. Indian elements appear in the lotus motifs, the Pietra Dura inlay work. 3 great architectural traditions merging into something entirely new, something dangerously expensive. 20,000 workers converged on Agra. Master craftsmen from across Asia, ordinary labourers dragged from villages. The white marble came from Makrana quarries in Rajasthan, 300 miles away. Imagine moving 1,000-pound blocks across that distance in 1632. No trucks, no trains, just elephants, oxen, and human sweat. The logistics alone should have been impossible, but Shah Jahan's grief demanded the impossible. His love required architectural miracles. The central dome measures 115 feet across, double-walled to create perfect acoustics. Whisper on one side, hear it clearly on the other. Persian architects knew this technique, but implementing it required mathematical precision that pushed construction limits. The dome appears to float because the architects created an optical illusion. The proportions trick your eye. Islamic geometry meets Indian craftsmanship. The result? Something that shouldn't exist, but does. Pure architectural poetry written in stone. Semi-precious stones arrived from impossible distances. Jade from China, turquoise from Tibet, carnelian from Arabia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Each tiny piece cut and fitted by hand into intricate floral patterns. Pietra Dura, stone pictures. Indian craftsmen perfected this technique. creating marble surfaces that look like silk tapestries. But every flower, every vine, every geometric pattern represented months of labor, beauty measured in human lifetimes. The four minarets leaned slightly outward, a deliberate design choice. If they ever fell, they'd fall away from the central tomb. Persian engineers understood earthquake principles. But these minarets also serve Islamic tradition, calls to prayer echoing across the Yamuna River. Each one took 3 years to complete. Workers died building them. Falls from scaffolding, heat exhaustion, construction accidents. Their names aren't carved anywhere. Only Shah Jahan and Mumtaz are remembered in marble. Perfect symmetry defines every element except one. The cenotaphs inside break the pattern. Shah Jahan's wasn't supposed to be there. The monument was designed for Mumtaz alone, but when he died in 1666, imprisoned by his own son, they buried him beside her. His tomb disrupts the mathematical perfection. Even in death, his presence altered her space. Love and obsession, blending into architectural compromise. The perfect monument, made imperfect by the man who built it. The cost nearly broke the empire. 32 million rupees, roughly $1 billion in modern money. But that comparison misses the point. In 1650s India, this represented a staggering percentage of the entire Mughal GDP. Tax revenues from across the subcontinent flowed toward Agra. Provinces that should have been developing infrastructure instead funded marble transport. Local governors watched their regions struggle, while resources poured into one man's architectural fantasy. Regional rebellions began in the 1640s, peasant uprisings, noble conspiracies. The treasury was drained. Military campaigns couldn't be properly funded because the money was locked in marble and precious stones. Aurangzeb watched his father's empire crumble, while workers carved another flower into another wall. This is the hidden cost of architectural perfection. Empires can't eat beauty. Armies can't march on poetry. Love doesn't pay soldiers' wages. Shah Jahan planned a second mausoleum across the river, black marble for himself, connected to Mumtaz's white tomb by a bridge. The architectural drawings still exist, a mirror image in dark stone. But by 1658, even his own family had seen enough. Aurangzeb's coup wasn't just about succession. It was about stopping the financial hemorrhage, about saving what remained of the empire his grandfather Akbar had built. The light changes throughout the day, and the marble responds like living skin, pink at dawn, pure white at noon, golden at sunset, silver under moonlight. Persian architects understood this. They positioned the monument to catch every possible light angle. The marble comes from a specific quarry, because only that stone has the right translucent quality. Beauty this specific requires resources, this exact, no substitutions, no compromises. Perfection demands everything. Calligraphy flows across every surface like frozen music. Quranic verses about paradise and resurrection. The letters grow larger as they climb higher, another optical illusion. From ground level, every line of text appears the same size, Persian and Arabic scripts interweaving with Indian decorative traditions, words becoming architecture, prayer becoming stone, Islamic theology carved into eternal visibility. But theology and politics rarely align. Faith and empire often conflict. The garden layout represents paradise, 4 rivers flowing from a central fountain. Persian tradition meets Indian landscape design, cypress trees and flower beds arranged in mathematical precision. The monument sits at the garden's north end, not the center. This creates a perfect view from the main gate, architectural theatre. Every step toward the tomb reveals new details, new proportions. The approach becomes part of the experience. Beauty choreographed across hundreds of yards. The real irony, this monument to eternal love hastened the empire's end. By 1707, the Mughal Empire was fragmenting. Regional powers were asserting independence. The British East India Company was establishing footholds. The treasury that should have strengthened defences had been transformed into architectural splendour. Shah Jahan's love for Mumtaz became the empire's vulnerability. Beauty built on borrowed time, borrowed resources, borrowed stability. Today, millions visit seeking romantic inspiration, but they're witnessing something more complex. Love transformed into obsession, grief channeled into obsectional megalomania. Personal loss becoming public catastrophe. The Taj Mahal remains breathtakingly beautiful. That's not debatable, but beauty built on such human cost carries weight beyond aesthetics. Persian poetry in marble, Islamic prayers in stone, Indian craftsmanship in precious metals, empire ending in architectural perfection. Chapter 14. enduring the sands of time. 4 centuries after Shah Jahan first dreamed of eternal beauty, the Taj Mahal faces its greatest enemy, time itself. The monument built to last forever now battles invisible forces that threaten to steal away its luminous perfection. Air pollution drifts across Agra like a slow poison, carrying industrial exhaust and millions of car engines. Each day, the pristine white marble absorbs more contamination, turning the symbol of pure love into something yellowed and stained. The irony cuts deep. Shah Jahan bankrupted an empire to create something eternal, but modernity might accomplish what centuries of monsoons, earthquakes, and wars could not. The marble that once gleamed like moonlight now carries a sickly amber tinge, particularly visible on the main dome. Scientists have identified the culprit. Sulfur dioxide mixing with moisture creates acid rain that slowly dissolves the calcium carbonate in marble. Chemistry becomes the enemy of romance, molecule by molecule eating away at love's greatest monument. Walking around the Taj Mahal today, you notice the discoloration most clearly in early morning light. The eastern face, which catches sunrise just as Mumtaz would have seen it, shows yellow patches like age spots on aging skin. Local guides point to areas where the marble looks healthy, then to sections where pollution has left its mark. They speak in whispers, as if acknowledging this slow death might somehow accelerate it. The monument that inspired millions now requires their protection. Agra's industrial growth creates the very prosperity that funds preservation efforts, yet simultaneously destroys what it seeks to protect. Leather factories, chemical plants, and coal-fired power stations ring the city, their smokestacks releasing compounds that rise, drift, and settle on the marble's intricate inlay work. The semi-precious stones Shah Jahan imported from across Asia now collect modern pollution from across the Ganges plain. Progress and preservation locked in a death spiral. Neither can escape. The Archaeological Survey of India employs teams of specialists who climb scaffolding each morning, carrying soft brushes and mild cleaning solutions. They work in sections, gently removing accumulated grime from carved flowers and Quranic calligraphy. It's painstaking work. 1 square meter might take days to clean properly, but they're fighting a losing battle. By the time they finish one section, pollution has already begun settling on areas they cleaned months earlier. Sisyphean labor in the name of eternal love. In 1996, India's Supreme Court created the Taj Trapezium Zone, restricting industrial activity within 10,400 square kilometers around the monument. Hundreds of factories were forced to close or relocate. Coal was banned as fuel within the zone. It seemed like decisive action until researchers realized that air currents carry pollution from much farther away. Delhi's smog, Kanpur's industrial emissions, even dust from distant construction projects all contribute to the Taj Mahal's slow deterioration. Geography makes every city India's neighbor. The marble itself tells the story of this struggle. Originally quarried from Makrana in Rajasthan, it was chosen for its pure white color and fine grain. Under microscopic examination, you can see how pollution particles embed themselves between the marble's crystals, creating permanent staining that no amount of gentle cleaning can remove. The stone that was meant to reflect moonlight forever now reflects humanity's industrial appetite, a mirror we might not want to look into too closely. Tourism creates another paradox. 5 million visitors annually generate revenue that funds conservation work, but their presence also contributes to the problem. Tour buses idle outside the gates. Hotels and restaurants proliferate nearby. The very attention that makes preservation politically and economically viable also accelerates the degradation process. Love for the monument becomes a form of slow destruction, admiration expressed through unconscious harm. How do you protect something by loving it less? Conservation scientists have experimented with protective coatings, but nothing works long-term on such a massive structure. Sealants change the marble's natural breathing properties. Chemical treatments can react unpredictably with existing inlay work. Traditional methods, lime plaster repairs, and careful cleaning remain the safest approaches, even if they're temporary solutions. Modern science, for all its sophistication, cannot improve on techniques perfected by Mughal craftsmen 3 centuries ago. Some problems resist technological solutions. The minarets lean slightly inward by design, creating an optical illusion of perfect verticality when viewed from ground level. But pollution affects even this architectural genius. Acid rain erodes the marble unevenly, potentially destabilizing the careful engineering that has kept the minarets standing for 400 years. Structural engineers monitor the lean with laser measurements, watching for changes that might indicate deeper problems. Beauty and physics intertwined, both vulnerable to chemistry's slow violence. Night brings a different perspective on the preservation challenge. Without sunlight to reveal the discoloration, the Taj Mahal glows white under floodlights, looking much as Shah Jahan intended. Security guards walk their rounds past walls that seem pristine in artificial light. It's a kind of mercy, this daily renewal of illusion, this nightly return to perfection. Dawn will bring reality again, but for these hours, love's monument reclaims its intended purity. International experts arrive regularly with new proposals. Japanese scientists suggest protective domes, German chemists offer innovative cleaning compounds. American preservationists recommend limiting visitor access, but the Taj Mahal exists in a living city with real economic needs and millions of people whose livelihoods depend on its attraction. Academic solutions must accommodate human complexity, and human complexity rarely accommodates academic solutions. The monument exists in the world, not in a laboratory. Some mornings, when atmospheric conditions align perfectly, the Taj Mahal appears almost untouched by time. Light hits the marble at precise angles, making discoloration temporarily invisible. Birds wheel around the minarets. The reflecting pools mirror a structure that looks eternal. These moments remind visitors why Shah Jahan's grief created something worth preserving, but they also highlight how much has been lost and how much more stands at risk. Beauty reveals its own vulnerability. The workers who maintain the Taj Mahal understand its fragility more intimately than most visitors ever will. They see the daily accumulation of dust, the subtle changes in marble texture, the way pollution affects different sections unevenly. Their work is both preservation and witness, documenting decline while fighting against it. They carry forward a tradition begun by the craftsmen who first laid these stones, protecting something larger than themselves through patient, careful labor. Perhaps the greatest irony is that the Taj Mahal's fame now threatens its existence. Social media spreads its image globally, drawing millions who want to witness its beauty firsthand. Each photograph shared online brings more visitors, more buses, more pressure on local infrastructure. The monument's success as a symbol of eternal love creates the conditions for its potential destruction. Fame becomes a form of slow poison, attention as dangerous as neglect. As preservation efforts continue, one question haunts conservators. Are we trying to stop time or simply slow it down? The Taj Mahal was always going to face this struggle. Shah Jahan built something meant to last forever, in a world where nothing does. Maybe the real love story isn't between emperor and empress, but between humanity and beauty itself, our desperate desire to preserve what moves us, even as we unconsciously destroy it through the very act of caring. Chapter 15. Love, a double-edged sword. Here we are, at the end of Shah Jahan's story. The Taj Mahal stands finished, magnificent, and haunted. 22 years of construction, an empire's treasury emptied, thousands dead from brutal working conditions, a son driven to imprison his own father. All for love, or was it? Sometimes the most important questions don't have clean answers. Was this devotion or destruction, wearing devotion's mask? Think about it for a moment. If someone you loved died tomorrow, how far would you go to honor their memory? Would you build them a monument, write them poetry, plant a garden? Now imagine you had unlimited power and resources. No one to tell you no, no budget to respect. Would your grief know any boundaries? This is the question Shah Jahan never asked himself, and the empire paid the price. The marble workers who died of heat exhaustion, did they understand they were part of a love story? The families taxed into poverty to fund construction, did the beauty of the finished monument justify their suffering? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Because love that ignores its cost to others isn't love anymore. It becomes something else entirely, something more dangerous, something more selfish. Shah Jahan's love for Mumtaz was real. 19 years of partnership, shared political decisions, traveling together on military campaigns. She held the imperial seal, actual power, not just ceremonial titles. Their affection shows up in court records, in poetry, in the unusual attention he paid her among his other wives. But real love doesn't end when the beloved dies. It transforms. It finds new ways to honor the relationship. Mumtaz asked for a memorial that would make the world never forget their love. She got her wish, but at what cost? Did she imagine that honoring their relationship would bankrupt an empire, that workers would die building her tomb, that her husband would become so obsessed he'd lose touch with reality? Love letters become history, but history also includes the unintended consequences of grand gestures made in grief. Aurangzeb watched his father destroying everything their family had built. The Mughal Empire, centuries of careful expansion, drained to build one monument. rebellions erupting over crushing taxes, trade routes failing, military campaigns abandoned. At what point does honoring the dead become betraying the living? When does grief become so consuming it blinds you to responsibility? Aurangzeb faced an impossible choice and chose the empire over his father's obsession. For 8 years, Shah Jahan sat imprisoned in Agra Fort. His window faced the Taj Mahal. He could see Mumtaz's tomb, but never visit it. Think about that irony. The man who spent 22 years and an empire's fortune building the world's most famous monument to love ended his days able only to look at it from a distance. Obsession always isolates, always, even when it wears love's face. The Taj Mahal is undeniably beautiful. The way light moves across that white marble, the perfect symmetry, the intricate inlay work that took decades to complete. Generations of artisans poured their skill into every detail. Their craftsmanship achieved immortality, but beauty and goodness aren't the same thing. Something can be stunning and harmful simultaneously. Recognition of beauty doesn't require approval of the methods used to create it. Here's what's fascinating about visiting the Taj Mahal today. 4 million people come every year. They take selfies. They marvel at the architecture. They call it the most romantic place on earth. But how many think about the workers who died building it? How many consider the empire that collapsed partly because of its cost? Romance is easier to Instagram than reckoning with historical complexity. But the full story is more important than the pretty version. Love at its best makes us more generous, more aware of others, more willing to sacrifice our own comfort for someone else's well-being. Shah Jahan's love for Mumtaz during her lifetime showed these qualities. He trusted her with political power, unusual for royal women. But grief can do the opposite. It can make us so focused on our own pain that we lose sight of everyone else's needs. Healthy love lifts others up. The question isn't whether Shah Jahan should have built Mumtaz a memorial. The question is whether the specific memorial he chose was proportionate to the resources available and the harm it caused. A beautiful garden tomb, reasonable. Poetry in her honor, lovely. A smaller mausoleum that didn't bankrupt the empire, thoughtful. But the Taj Mahal, that was grief refusing to accept limits. And limitless grief becomes destruction. Think about the memorials in your own life. Photos on the mantle, stories you tell about people you've lost, traditions you maintain. These cost little but preserve much. They honor memory without harming the living. The most meaningful tributes often happen in quiet moments, when you do something kind because it's what they would have done. When you live better because their love changed you. Small gestures, sustainable grief. Love that continues giving. The Taj Mahal teaches us something crucial about power and responsibility. When you have unlimited resources and no one can tell you no, your choices reveal who you really are. Shah Jahan chose monument over people, personal grief over public good. This wasn't about loving Mumtaz too much. It was about loving everything else too little. Real love doesn't require others to pay for your devotion. It finds ways to honor memory that lift everyone up. So what do we take from this? That the Taj Mahal isn't romantic? That Shah Jahan didn't love his wife? No, we take complexity. We take nuance. We take the understanding that even genuine love can become harmful when it loses perspective. The most loving thing isn't always the grandest gesture. Sometimes it's knowing when enough is enough. Sometimes it's choosing restraint over excess. Sometimes it's remembering the living while honoring the dead. History's greatest love stories aren't always happy endings. They're human stories, complicated ones. Stories about people trying to love well, and sometimes failing spectacularly. Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal loved each other genuinely, but his response to losing her shows how grief unchecked by wisdom can become its own form of madness. The monument remains, the empire fell, the workers died, the beauty endures, all of it is true. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider this. The grandest gestures aren't always the most loving ones. Sometimes love means planting a small garden instead of building a marble palace. Sometimes it means writing a letter no one else will read. Sometimes it means choosing the living over the dead. Love well, love wisely, and remember, true devotion doesn't require an empire's destruction. It requires only an open heart and conscious choices.